Are you hearing me in the front room? Zoom people?
Can you see? Yeah, there you go. That was okay.
We see any thumbs up, yes? Okay. All right. So today, when I'm almost finished with my Heart Sutra talks, it occurred to me to put Avalokiteshvara on the altar. She usually lives in the front vestibule, but since we're talking about Avalokiteshvara in this sutra, I thought maybe you'd like an image. You can see from the one on the altar that she looks quite feminine, quite graceful and feminine. But in the sutra, Avalokiteshvara is referred to as male. So it's a very gender flexible Avalokiteshvara, sometimes depicted as male, sometimes as female. In the front end, though, there's a poster on the wall of an ancient statue of Avalokiteshvara, and it looks much more masculine than this one. So in the West, I think we often think of Avalokiteshvara as feminine. It's probably a gender stereotype. So we sometimes think of women as softer and more kind and compassionate. So maybe that's why in this country often depicted as female. Don't know. All right, so before I start on this particular talk for today, I'm going to give you a quick review. This is called the Mahaprajna Paramita Heart Sutra, the Great Transcendental Wisdom Heart Sutra, called Heart, because it depicts the heart of the teachings, not because it's Valentine-ish. So I'm going to give you a quick review. Before we get to the part that we chant, we'll be chanting it later today, there's a prologue, and in this prologue they set up the sutra. You have to remember that the sutras, a lot of them came from an oral culture, so they were preached, at least presumably, before they were written down. So we have a bunch of Buddhists on a hillside listening to a sermon, and present is Buddha, who's in a very deep state of meditation, and somehow or other in this deep state of meditation that he's in, he's kind of sending subliminal messages to Avalokiteshvara, who is also there and is in deep meditation. And this teaching that he receives in the sutra is what is preached in the Heart Sutra. We have also a character in this prologue is called Shariputra. Shariputra is just a sort of like ordinary practitioner. And Avalokiteshvara announces that he has seen the emptiness of all the 5 conditions, quote. So Shariputra asked the question, well, all right, you've seen this is a very important teaching. Please tell us about it and tell us how we should practice it. So then we go into the sutra, the major part of the sutra, which is the part that we chant. And this is Avalokiteshvara's answer to Shariputra's question. Okay, now I'm going to explain it to you. I'll just read you the sutra so far, it's not very long. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva doing deep prajna paramita clearly saw emptiness of all the 5 conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. Oh, Shariputra, see, she's addressing Shariputra because he's the one who asked the question. Oh, Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness, no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness, exactly form. So you can see from this repetition and variation on this statement that this is the heart of the teaching that comes in this sutra. This is the most important part. This is what they want you to get. They want you to get some realization of form and emptiness and their relationship. Sutra continues, sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness are likewise like this. O Shariputra, all dharmas are forms of emptiness, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. So in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No color, sound, smell, taste, touch, phenomena. No realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, and no end to ignorance. No old age and death, and no end to old age and death. No suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, and no gain. And now we're coming to the first line that we're going to talk about today. This line goes, no gain. It continues from the last line, no gain. And thus the Bodhisattva lives prajna paramita. So let's continue with our breakdown of this sutra. So no gain, and thus the Bodhisattva lives prajna paramita. And it continues, with no hindrance in the mind. No hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond deluded thoughts, this is nirvana. All past, present, and future Buddhas live prajna paramita, and therefore attain anuttara samyak sambodhi. Therefore know that prajna paramita is the great mantra, the vivid mantra, the best mantra, the unsurpassable mantra. It completely clears all pain. This is the truth, not a lie. So set forth the prajna paramita mantra, set forth this mantra and say, Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha prajna paramita. I'll explain what all these foreign words mean as I go along. So the first line, no gain, and thus the Bodhisattva lives prajna paramita. Notice that this line has a thus in it, because it's referring to all the parts that came before. The part that came before is a long sort of erasing of everything, telling you how the 5 conditions that Avalokiteshvara realized were empty means that the senses are empty. The senses are what we depend on to get information about our world, right? And the sutra's telling us, no, the information we're getting there is not 100% accurate, because each of us will have a different impression of the same thing. Why? Because we're bringing to it not just what we see or hear, but we're bringing to it an interpretation. And this interpretation comes through consciousness, awareness, blah, 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 all the things that it named. If you doubt that people are seeing different things, just refer to police lineups, where people are often identifying the wrong person, or different people are identifying different persons. So it's saying because because of all this, this is why the Bodhisattva is living prajnaparamita. Prajnaparamita means ultimate wisdom. Prajna means wisdom. Paramita is transcendental or ultimate or deepest or most profound wisdom. So they're saying that because they, like Avalokiteshvara, they have realized that the senses are empty. The way we interpret things, the mind is empty, and that all the Buddhist teachings, up to and including all the Buddhist teachings, the 12-fold chain of origination, the Eightfold Path, all of these things that Buddhism teaches is saying, no, they're all empty. It's all empty. And what does empty mean in Buddhism? It means not permanent. They're all changing. And not able to be independent, not able to stand alone. They can only exist in relation to everything else. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. So this line continues this long series of negatives enumerated in the past lines, up to and including the Buddhist teachings. And what it's saying to you is it's all empty. It's saying that everything has only a provisional kind of existence. Everything is subject to change and exists only in a relational way. It is the context of other things that gives the meaning to each thing. Because of this quality, Buddhism says things are not independent, or sometimes it says they are codependently arising. So what this line points out is that all these emptinesses that the sutra has gone into in great detail loosens the grip for us, if we see it, if we see their emptiness, of what we conventionally call reality. This is why Buddhism says we're deluded, because we can't see everything exactly the way it is. Because what we take as reality, which is the surface world of things and situations, this is not quite reality. It's conventional reality, sometimes called in Buddhism the relative, but it's not ultimate reality. When we see the truth of emptiness, then we will grip less tightly and try to control things less. And what the line says to us is that when we can do this, when we see this emptiness and we let go a little bit, then we live what it's calling prajnaparamita. The sutra says that we don't believe or understand this profound wisdom, but that what we do is we live it. We realize it, and once we see it, we live it. We're part of the school of Buddhism that's called Mahayana. There's another school that's called Theravada. That's the older school. And in Mahayana teachings, the Bodhisattva plays a big role. In Theravada Buddhism, you get enlightened and then you sort of float off to nirvana on a lotus blossom, that's sort of their idea of what happens to you. You kind of check out because you're happy. you're peaceful, you're at peace. But in Mahayana, what happens is you get enlightened and you work in the conventional world to save others. You see, you've got enlightened and you realize how wonderful it is, so you go back to help everyone else in the world. So this is, when you do this, is called the bodhisattva. So Avalokiteshvara is a bodhisattva, but all of us have the potential to be a bodhisattva. Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion. So what the sutra is pointing out is that the realization of prajnaparamita is necessary for the path of the bodhisattva. If we think that we're a self, we're going to want to take care of that self. But once we see emptiness, what we realize is that, oh, this self is not quite what I think either, because it's also impermanent and only exists in relationship to everyone else. So when we let go of that sense that we have to guard this self and take care of it, then we can dispense with so much care for ourselves. This is not something we can do by will, by saying, oh, I'm going to be less selfish. Because our self will assert itself. We have to see the aspect of the self that's empty. And this is the only way to really be selfless with joy. Otherwise, we're always kind of denying ourselves and trying to be better than we actually feel like being. So this no gain in this line points out that the wisdom of the other shore is not something we gain or add to what we already have. It says no, where are we here? No gain unless the bodhisattva lives prajnaparamita. There's no gain because we already have it. This is what the Buddha said. When the Buddha became enlightened, the first thing he said was, I and all sentient beings, that means you, are inherently Buddha. Or sometimes it's translated, are inherently enlightened. So it means we already are Buddha, we already are enlightened. And what keeps us from acting like Buddha, not rampaging around the world like selfish pigs, what keeps us from acting like we're Buddha is that we don't realize it. So this is what realization and enlightenment is about. It's about seeing something we didn't see before. So there is no gain essentially because we already are it. But we're not adding anything new on that we don't already have. It's not something we get from our teachers. It's not something we learn through Buddhist philosophy. It's a deep wisdom that we all already have, inherent in us and inherent in all sentient beings. So this line of the sutra is a major turning point in the sutra. It's here that the emphasis on negatives and emptiness that Avalokiteshvara has been talking about again and again and again. Here, he begins to describe enlightenment or realization and describes what it's like mostly in positive terms. So the next line says, with no hindrance, wait a minute, I'll check it. With no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. So the hindrance that we will be having is that we don't see it. That Buddhism calls this ignorance, or our delusion. We don't get it. And what's creating this ignorance is what the sutra has been talking about. The fact that the senses and the way we process sensory data is not giving us reality. The hindrance is through the mind, through the way we process and think about what we're the kind of information we're getting from the world. So what the line is telling us that once we're not doing this anymore, then we're seeing reality, we will have no fear. This line points out that the effect on the mind of seeing the truth of emptiness teaches us that the problems we experience in life are ultimately problems because our mind makes them so. Often we can't change the facts on the ground of our lives. We can't change ourselves even. We can't change the world around us. Maybe particularly important at this time in our country's political life to acknowledge this. But one thing we can work with is our minds. And we can change the way our minds frame and interpret things. We can change the way our minds cling to certain attitudes and opinions about the facts that we're getting from the world around us. And how do we do this? How do we change how our minds work? By seeing the truth of emptiness. When we see this, our minds are much more flexible and adaptable, less full of prejudice and stubbornness. So it is in this state that Avalokita describes and has achieved himself that we often find that the hindrances are gone. The hindrances which our minds create because we cling to a static view of ourselves and the world are gone. I always like the way this says in a very childish kind of way, this is the truth, not a lie. I'm not lying, no. The hindrance is believing too firmly in our own existence. When it goes, fear goes. Partly because of what we were talking about before. If you're not clinging so tightly to yourself and protecting it, then what is there to be afraid of? The next line says, far beyond deluded thoughts. This is nirvana. So nirvana is not a place. It takes place in your mind. So this is labeling the condition which we've just been talking about, the realization of emptiness. This condition, this realization is nirvana itself. Avalokiteshvara says nirvana is far beyond deluded thoughts. And what deluded thoughts are those? All deluded thoughts start with the basic deluded assumption that you exist. It's not that you don't exist, but it's that you don't exist in this very solid, unchangeable way that you think you do. And the universe, everything in the universe is exactly the same. It's not that there's nothing out there, that life is but a dream. No, there's a real world out there, but that it's not quite the way we think it is. We don't quite see it correctly. When we see through the delusion of self, the very state of seeing and living prajnaparamita, this transcendent wisdom, is nirvana. Not a separate place, not a mystical state. It's just our ordinary lives once we have seen the truth of emptiness. It's nirvana because to loosen our grip on things, on suffering, we can sigh a big sigh of relief that we don't have to protect everything around us. We don't have to be so feverish about taking care of ourselves. We don't have to try to control everything in our lives. The next line goes, all past, present, and future Buddhas live prajnaparamita and therefore attain anuttara samyak sambodhi. So anuttara samyak sambodhi is complete unsurpassed enlightenment. This is Pali language here, the original liturgical language of Buddhism. So originally Buddha was said to be the only one who actually attained this complete enlightenment. No one else, everyone else was just fell a little short. But nonetheless, sometimes you do hear people's other characters in Buddhist literature said to attain anuttara samyak sambodhi. So they've kind of let a few more people in. It begins by saying all past, present, and future Buddhas live prajnaparamita. That's what makes you a Buddha. When are you a Buddha? When you realize emptiness. So this prajnaparamita wisdom is about emptiness. So clearly, if you're a Buddha, it's because you're living prajnaparamita. There's a lot of, kind of mythical Buddhist stories, and apparently part of the story goes that before Buddha was born, Buddha was an actual person, a historical person. We know that, Siddhartha, and when he was enlightened, he became Buddha. Everyone started to call him Buddha, which meant enlightened one, aware one, that kind of thing. But he was a real person. But before he was born and he became the Buddha, there were what's called past 7 Buddhas. They're all made up. I mean, they're just part of stories. They're a myth. And they all have names and they all have stories of how they became the Buddha and so on and so forth. So when it says past Buddhas, it's talking about these guys. And present Buddhas means everyone who's a Buddhist now and has had insight. And future Buddhas, everyone who will achieve this in the future. Also, there are also mythological characters who are called future Buddhas, and they all have names and stories too. So it's talking about, the Buddhas that are in Buddhist literature, plus the real Buddhist practitioners. So what it's saying here is, this is a Mahayana teaching. This came along later than earlier Buddhism. This emphasis on emptiness. And what it's doing here is it's kind of extending this teaching to everyone. What it's saying is you don't have to be a Mahayana Buddhist, because clearly if you were a Buddha in the past, you had to have seen this same thing that Avalokiteshvara is now seeing, the emptiness of 5 conditions. So it's saying, this teaching is available to everybody. It isn't just for Mahayana Buddhists. Buddhism is very conscious of time, and it bears an interesting relationship to time. It sees that we both exist in ordinary, linear, everyday time, clock time, And also that there's a dimension of life, which Buddhism calls the moment, when the strictures of clock time do not apply. Buddhism sees, each moment as a kind of eternal and just a flash. In the Diamond Sutras, there's a flash of lightning in a summer sky, and then the moment is gone, because the basic teaching of Buddhism is everything is changing. So it's this other dimension of time, not the everyday time we experience in our lives, but the dimension of time it calls the moment. The sutra places realization, the quality all Buddhists and each of us share in all dimensions of time. So the past, the present, the future. In all time, according to Mahayana, there have been enlightened Buddhas, not just coming of age now, but this new teaching. Some of the future Buddhas, I think it's Vairocana is like considered to be the future Buddha. Maitreya, I think, is also another future Buddha. If you're interested in their stories, you can look them up online. So it's just emphasizing that there are no exceptions. If you're a Buddha, you've seen this prajnaparamita wisdom. So the line goes on to tell us that all of these Buddhas attained Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. This phrase is left in the Pali language because it was originally applying to the Buddha. The implication is that the kind of awakening that the Buddha had and all Buddhists have is awakening to the truth of emphasis, awakening to prajnaparamita. So the next line goes on to say, therefore, because of all this important stuff that we've been telling you, prajnaparamita, this wisdom, this sutra, this teaching, is the great mantra, the vivid mantra, the best mantra, the unsurpassable mantra. So a mantra is, just like a little formula, a little poetic line of words. So it's going to tell you what the mantra is in a short while. So it's just praising it, saying, look, this is the most impossible, important teaching ever, the indispensable teaching. You must believe this, you must see this if you want to be enlightened, and so on. This is the basis of all Buddhist insight. So it just sort of heaps superlatives up about the mantra and the importance and excellence of these teachings. So the mantra serves as a kind of summing up of the whole sutra. Mantras are, they're not exactly magical, but they're kind of healing. And usually in Buddhism, mantras do not appear in sutras. We have some mantras we chant. And usually the meaning is not very logical. They tend to be rhythmic little words, something like hey diddle diddle hey, kind of thing. And so what's important about them is not what they mean, but the sound patterns that they produce and the rhythm. The next line says, it completely clears all pain. This is the truth, not a lie. When it says it completely clears all pain, it's talking about the mantra. The mantra is going to clear all your pain, so it says. the teachings of Prajnaparamita in the mantra, the perfection of wisdom, the deepest wisdom of Buddhist teachings. This is what's going to clear your pain. The line makes a promise that if we realize the wisdom, suffering will be relieved. No, you can note that this line actually contradicts an earlier part of the sutra where it says there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, no gain. You know, take your choice which one you believe. Both are actually true in Buddhism, that if you're dealing with the world of emptiness, then there is no pain, because who would there be to feel pain? But if you're dealing with the everyday world, which we're all embedded in, whether we like it or not, then we are dealing with pain, because it's inevitable that humans suffer. Not just humans, the rest of the sentient beings also suffer. So with these lines, the sutra preached by Avalokiteshvara comes to an end. What is left is the mantra itself. The sutra tells us to set it forth. Set forth this sutra and say. And what are we to say? We're to say gate, gate, paragate, samgate, bodhisvaha prajna heart sutra. So that's the mantra. There's value in reciting this mantra and reciting it out loud, chanting it, which we'll do later. It's partly because of the effect on the body. You breathe deeply when you say it, and just like music has a certain effect on you, the rhythmicness of the chant has a certain effect as well. The translation of this mantra is generally given as this: gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond enlightenment. And the swaha is, it's sort of like hail Buddha or honor to Buddha, something like that. There's a lot of discussion in the literature about this sutra, about why the mantra is here. Usually mantras are not part of sutras, they are chants in Buddhism. Part of our liturgy practice. So a mantra is a kind of formula which invokes and protects other beings to aid us. Here, it's not the mantra itself which protects, but the teachings which it embodies, which are the teachings of the sutra, the teachings of emptiness and emptiness in form. So I'm going to stop there, and there is one more Heart Sutra talk. Just as there was a prologue that we don't chant, that introduces the sutra, there's an epilogue which we don't chant, which kind of ties it up in a bow. And so we'll talk about that next time, and also go into some having spent time with the sutra and what it's telling us and what it means. We're going to try to make it a little more tailored to our particular needs right here in Philadelphia 2025. Well, so what does it mean? What does it mean that we should do? What does it mean for our practice? What does it mean for our lives? So one more talk coming up at some point.